everyone, and welcome to tonight's edition of Literary Nights with Unsolicited Press. Joining us is a prose poet, Richard Krause, and a creative nonfiction author, Anna B. Moore. And tonight we're going to hear from them, reading from their wonderful works published by Unsolicited Press. And they're going to talk a little bit about their works and their books. After which they're going to read from their works, and then we're going to have a Q&A. So thanks for joining us this evening. Anna, would you like to start?
I would love to start. Hi, everybody. Thank you for showing up. Thanks, Rosalia, for doing this, and thanks to Unsolicited Press for publishing my book, Don't Pity the Desperate. It came out on September 10th of this year. It is available at the bookstore, a wonderful, giant used bookstore in downtown Chico, California, local bookstore. And it is also available on Amazon. It is also available on the Unsolicited Press website. And it is all of Unsolicited Press's books, I believe, are available as ebooks through Amazon as well. So awesome. The book is about a set of teenagers who are in a hospital in the 1980s. They are all in a rehab for drug and alcohol addiction. The center of the story, the protagonist of the story, is Myra, and she is 16. And it is her story mixed with theirs, but mostly it's about her. And I've done a couple readings for Unsolicited Press this year before, which I'm very grateful for. I really enjoyed. And so this time, though, I'm gonna read a couple short chapters from the middle of the novel. And so I'm gonna give you a synopsis, a very brief one, to get you to the point where I'm gonna read to you. So Myra has been in rehab for 10 or 15 days, and she has a boyfriend. And they run away together in order to get together, if you know what I mean. And they're planning to go back to the rehab because they both want sobriety, but they take off so they can be together for a little bit. And in the interest of time, I'm just going to take you right into this time that they have together while they're out and then go from there. So you'll know what they're doing with the first sentence. It's very important. Okay? All right. And we're all just going to get through it. Okay, here we go. This chapter is called Performance, Part 2. It was a sweet, slippery pain, smooth and strong and commanding. Myra sucked air and held her arms around Charlie's shoulders and saw in the dimmed floodlights the trees bowing way over their heads, and, as usual, she could not identify them. Cars zoomed on a highway in the distance. The grass on the golf course was so short she couldn't even feel it pressing into her back through the thin sheet they had taken from Jeff's. The ground was hard. A warm breeze blew on her neck. It was June, after all, June in Iowa, and the air was not yet sopping wet, but it was hot, and mosquitoes bit her legs as she held them open to Charlie's thrusts and then pulled them in to cradle his torso. She was looking at the trees without focus, layers of green in all the leaves. On their way to the gas station for a condom, he had held her hand. They walked along a strip of restaurants and gas station and a Kmart and Kmart-like stores and soccer fields, but the strip had no sidewalk, so they'd walked on the hard dirt of the shoulder or across various parking lots. It was getting dark. It was getting dark, Charlie had said, so he doubted anyone would really notice them. People walked this strip all the time, and there was no need to worry. A semi boomed past them, then another. So, I've had sex with 4 other people, Charlie said. Were they your girlfriends? Their hands were starting to sweat together, palms warming. Charlie shook his head. Just friends and stuff. How many people have you had sex with? 1, Myra said. She decided to say something that would make her appear to be a different kind of person than she was. He was a dick. Charlie laughed. I won't be a dick. Don't worry. They reached the gas station, and she stood outside the glass door while Charlie went to the men's room to buy a condom from the machine. It was a barren place with one narrow refrigerator of beer and pop, a wire rack of candy resting on the counter. The attendant wore a stained brown uniform. He was filthy. Myra was glad he barely looked at them. Out the window lift behind him, an orange beetle bug stood in the air on a hydraulic lift, puddles of oil on the gravel beneath. Got one. Charlie grabbed her hand and led her back down the strip. It was darker now. Cars were using headlights through the gray. Charlie was finished. He touched her cheek. You okay? Myra smiled. Yeah. Charlie pulled himself out of her, peeled off the condom, and flung it into the trees. Let's be naked. He stood up. They were hidden in a cove, masked by trees, beside a tiny pond and a sand trap. They could hear mosquitoes all around them, but for some reason, Myra wasn't feeling bites anymore. Fluid came out of her in folds, soaking the sheet. Charlie jumped along the edge of the pond as if he had a pogo stick. I love being naked. Myra wanted to wipe herself with the sheet, but felt it would appear disgusting. She pulled up her underwear, wincing, then her jeans, and she saw in her back pocket Nancy's letter from that morning, a corner of the white paper poking up. Nancy would love this story. When Myra got out, she would tell Nancy everything. Everything except the part where they returned to Jeff's and put cushions on the floor to sleep in and sat in front of the television and started making out, slowly removing clothes. Charlie didn't mention a condom, and of course Myra didn't either. She wondered if, their first time, the condom had been a sort of icebreaker, and now they wouldn't use one anymore. She was hungry, tired, and sore. She doubted very much that Charlie's penis was sore, swollen, or sticky. She doubted that he felt repulsed when he had to pull on the same underwear. She didn't want to do it again. She wanted to go to sleep. You want to do it doggy style? Charlie asked, grinning. What's that? She asked. You don't know what doggy style is? Charlie got a cigarette from the pocket of his jeans and lit it and offered one to Myra. She took it and shook her head. He moved from the cushions, the TV blinking behind him, the only light in the room. She could almost see his shadow on the carpet when he got on his hands and knees. He thrust his hips several times, his penis and testicles bouncing along with him, and then he held the position. He looked at Myra, his eyebrows up, and his cigarette hanging from his mouth. Myra shook her head so quickly she didn't realize it. It felt almost like a tremor. She had no idea what his demonstration meant. Where was she supposed to be if he was on his hands and knees? No. Okay. Charlie lay beside her and held her hand, blew smoke at the ceiling, and Myra rubbed his fingers with her thumb. Smooth compressions over the ridge in his knuckles. In Myra's dreams, her mother was in other women's bodies. She was Nancy's mom. She was the bartender at the Ramada. She was Kim Carnes. She was Mrs. O'Hara, her 5th grade teacher. Now her mother became Mrs. Hunsaker, the City High PE teacher who watched Myra in the locker room to make sure she showered. Mrs. Hunsaker watched all the girls, but especially Myra because she knew how Myra despised PE. Instead of participating in any stupid thing they were forced to do that made Myra feel weak and powerless and frantic to be someplace else, Myra stood with her arms crossed tight while a softball or soccer ball or volleyball or basketball sped past her. Because how was she supposed to stand? As if she were really going to catch something? What should she do with her arms? What position should she possibly assume that didn't make her feel like an engorged zit on a clear face? Why did she have to be there at all, in the center of everything, while no one noticed her? A boy almost always covered for her anyway. Stanley Sminkin the wrestler, Elvin Berry who smelled, Tommy Christensen who sold pot. They were the saviors of all the teens who hated PE. When it ended, Myra walked fast to the locker room, dropped her clothes, and wrapped her torso in one of their scratchy towels, felt her butt hanging out, and slouched her shoulders to try and get the towel to hang lower. None of the girls wanted anyone to see them naked, but Myra was curious and ashamed for being curious, and as she dreamed the desire and the knowledge were a force that rose in her throat and made her want to speak, to yell for help, to prevent a tragedy, an uncovering. She inhaled the steam, felt the mist on her toes from the foot spray pump you stepped on as you walked into the shower and again as you walked out. And when Myra did walk out, there was Mrs. Hunsaker, unwarm and strange with weird frog-like lips, checking Myra's shoulders to see if they were wet, reaching over and touching the top of her head. Your hair is dry, said Mrs. Hunsaker in her mother's voice. The locker room bubbled with conversation from the other girls. concrete blocks and tile painted dark red with white stripes, the school colors. I took a shower. Go on. She put her hands on Myra's shoulders, turned her around. I'll be waiting right here. Mom, Myra cried. Her eyes opened and she could not move. She blinked. The clock ticked. She sat up. Charlie, who was asleep, had left the television on without sound. A white hand reached up from the dinner table from the diner table in Take on Me, the video by Aha. She tried to decide if the girl in the video was pretty or not, then looked down at Charlie. She had never seen a boy asleep before. She had never slept beside a boy before. Charlie was still naked, his body covered with a sheet. His nose was still big. In the light of the television, his acne marks made him look weathered, as if he were older, a pioneer tired from a day of cleaning prairie to build a log cabin. Myra remembered from a history class that the tallgrass prairie had grown over 7 feet high. If cattle went missing, farmers had to stand on the backs of their horses to spot them. Myra lay back down and pulled the Iowa State blanket over her chest. The space between her breasts was damp with sweat, sorrow, longing, with the power of her mother's dead voice and the earth that Myra knew so little about. Places, plants, textures, origins. The vagueness was what held. Myra and Charlie walked into the hospital at 11 o'clock in the morning. The lobby empty except for the stiff furniture, plastic chairs with metal legs, a glassed-in wall of information desks. Charlie pushed the elevator button, his face stiff with fear and his finger trembling just a little. When they got to the unit, it would be goodbye. Didn't Charlie realize this? Would he hold her hand, put his arm around her? They stepped into the elevator. He pushed 4. The doors closed. I am so fucking dead, Charlie said. Come here, Myra said, reaching her hand toward him. Quick. Not now. The doors parted. And there stood Russell Dean, as if he had been waiting for them, sent from above, his clipboard and files tucked under one arm. Beside him was Billy, who was graduating that day, and so with Billy were his mother, father, and little sister. Myra became aware of her tangled and fuzzed hair, the dirt smudged all over her legs, the layers of transparent grime on her teeth, the cavernous growls in her stomach that grew louder as Billy's family stared at her and Charlie for the longest few seconds in the history of time. Billy looked a little crushed. When people ran, they let everyone down. They broke trust. They damaged the community. Billy's parents looked confused. His sister, 5 years old, sucked on a lollipop and held her mother's hand. Why, it's Myra and Charlie, Russell Dean said, his face spreading into the grin, the one that knew everything. So nice to see you. He gestured to Billy and his family to enter the elevator while Myra and Charlie walked out of it. They looked up at Russell Dean as he put his hands fiercely on their backs. March your asses down to the nurses' station. We'll chat later over tea. They walked. Shit, Charlie said. Shit, shit, shit. Way down the hall were Bliss and Grace, the nurses, standing at the counter, writing in charts. In a security mirror above them, Myra saw tiny versions of herself and Charlie, the convex curve pushing them far apart, much further than they really were. And this next chapter is very short. It's kind of the conclusion of the consequences of this run away. Damage. Grace would not let her take a shower. After recreation, she said. On the weekends, when the main counselors were off and patients didn't have a small group in the morning and afternoon, they went to the rec room on the floor below the unit. A few of them looked out the large observation windows over the Iowa River below or sat with their big books and worked on their assignments, legal pads or spirals in their laps. Other patients played the one mixtape they had over and over on the boombox. Birthday, Leroy Brown, Peace Train, Hotel California. They sang as loud as they could. Afternoon sun shining across the foosball table as they danced. But today was Wednesday, and it was time for recreation, and everyone would play softball in the diamond across the street. You can shower afterward, Grace said. Myra sat on the exam table in the tiny nurse's office behind their station, while Grace took her blood pressure and checked her eyes and nose and throat, checked her reflexes and took her temperature. Like everyone else. The last thing you get right now is special treatment. Did you use? No. Out the tiny rectangle of a window was a rooftop that looked like a giant shingle. We'll see. She handed Myra a urine cup and opened the door, led her through the patients who were waiting at the counter for their midday meds. Myra met their eyes. The boys smiled. The girls did not. Myra sat down and tried to pee. She had been with Charlie. That was what she had wanted, and she had wanted to be with him every day for the rest of her life. She searched for the elation, but instead felt her urine burning out as if through a pinhole in a balloon. Her guts felt swollen, her vaginal skin tender and sore. Grace told Myra to go straight to lunch. Can I change clothes? What do you think? Bliss made her sit alone at one end of a mostly empty table. You're on no contact, Bliss said calmly. Her elbows were skeletal. She stood over Myra and watched her sit down with her tray. Reuben's! It was Reuben Day, everyone's favorite. Chocolate cake for dessert. Myra was starving. That means eye contact, too. But when Bliss wasn't looking, Abby waved. Jen pretended Myra wasn't there. Charlie sat across the room, also eating alone, not looking at her or trying to. One signal. One sign from him, and she'd do whatever he wanted. Just like with Chad Norris, just like with Mark, she felt the pattern of her behavior, her history, etching itself in. She was tired. She had barely slept. The plaid izod she had worn since yesterday looked like someone had run it over. After lunch, they all went to their rooms and changed into shorts and t-shirts for softball. Myra's legs were red with mosquito bites. She had scratched the ones around her ankles until a few of them bled, and she had swatches of dirt on her calves and a giant swirl of it on her thigh that she had noticed in the mirror just as Margaret opened the door to Myra's room. Let's go. I didn't use, Myra said, I promise. Her inner thigh muscles, what were they called? Hurt. Her quads hurt. Her vagina hurt. Her forearms were sore. She was thirsty after that Reuben. Do you know what you've done? I called my dad. I didn't use. Jen was sobbing last night. She and Victor were worried sick. Billy was so mad he didn't eat. All his hard work. And Charlie, I can't even talk about him. He wasn't here for Billy's last community. You know that? I'm sorry, Myra said. You'll have plenty of people to say that to. And after softball, it's 5 days of pajamas for both of you. Why? So you know how sick you are. Myra started in the outfield on second base. The bright sun made her squint. Her legs looked like they were not hers, her feet too far from her head. She smiled, laughed a little, cheered for whoever was at bat, hated the baseball glove that smelled like feet, cracked and rough on her palm. She felt an empty sense of euphoria and a violent sense of embarrassment, the daylight around her a backdrop to a view of herself. Hi, Myra. Myra turned around to see Mitch with the doughy face, drug of choice Budweiser, standing right behind her. He had moved forward from the outfield. What happened to your legs? He had a deep, loud voice. He was 17, a senior from Ames, a football player, a prom king. His skin was pasty, his stomach beer full but not fat, his hair feathered above and below his ears. This was the first time Myra had seen him in anything except hospital pajamas. He was on day 6. Mosquitoes, Myra said. Charlie has them too. Myra watched as he looked from her ankles to her face, up and down, again and again. She felt flattered and repulsed, thrilled and sickened. She felt these oxymorons before. In 8th grade during study hall, she'd gotten a note from 2 popular boys, a stick figure of her with a large arrow pointing to her crotch. Does this go with your butt and tits? When she got up to throw it away, they watched her walk from her desk to the trash bin and back. She had felt that stare many times. Even when no boys were staring at her, she felt like they were, a constant pull and urgency. He grinned. Where did you go? Should she tell him anything? Was he somehow trying to be her friend? He was standing too close. Across the field, Charlie stood in line to bat with the other team, talking, violating no contact. She supposed she just had too. Was Charlie talking about her? Would he tell them how it felt to have sex with Myra? Would he laugh at her? Would he tell them that she was beautiful? How did boys talk to each other about girls, and why didn't she know? What should she do right at this moment to keep from crying? She looked right into Mitch's tiny eyes. Paris. Mitch laughed as Jen hit the ball. It rolled right to Myra. She tried to scoop it up, but her glove slipped off. When she pulled it back on and stood, Mitch threw the ball to first base. If there was anything Myra hated more than softball, she couldn't think what it was. She crossed her arms, rolled her eyes, imagined setting her glove on fire. The sun burned her back. Her t-shirt was so hot against her shoulders, she wondered if it was scalding her skin. Tina was catcher, Margaret was umpire, Charlie was up to bat. He was not an athlete. He dropped acid and listened to Frank Zappa and smoked pot and cigarettes, and he hated jocks. He had told her so. But he had confidence, as if he had potential and knew it. Myra had never seen a girl who wasn't in sports have this kind of comfort with them. She wondered if the confidence came before the sport, and she wondered why so many girls didn't have any. She wasn't the only one who stood like a statue in the midst of a game and waited for it to end. But Charlie, despite his detachment from sports, could make baskets, could catch a ball. So when he went up to home plate, bat in hand, Mitch and all the others on Myra's team backed up. Myra stayed where she was. She put her weight on one foot and let her other hip rest out. Sweat dripped down her back. What are you going to get to, what base are you going to get to, Charlie? Mitch called. The metaphor. It almost made Myra's knees buckle, took the moisture from her mouth. Please, God, no. Brian threw the pitch. Charlie missed. Strike one, called Margaret. It was hot and breezeless. Brian pitched again. Strike two. Myra put her weight on her other leg, held her breath. Come on, Mitch called. You gonna score another home run, Charlie? The boys whooped and laughed. The girls did too. A few of them whispered to each other. Would Margaret do anything, say anything to them? Myra tried to stay still, like the trunk of an ancient tree, unaffected by her environment. Stoic. Jen was on Myra's team, playing first base, hair sprayed back so hard that not one strand frizzed up. She didn't look at Myra, but she didn't laugh either. Myra would ignore them. But how? Look away? Toward what? Act as if she didn't care? How would she do that, since she did? Or should she drop her glove and cry, yell, rise above it like a better person? Every cliched instruction would fail her if she tried. That's enough, everyone, Margaret called. God, please take these feelings from me. I turn them over to you. I turn everything over to you. Wasn't this the answer? Step 3, turned our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. Please take my shame away. Please help me. She tried to remember the official 3rd step prayer from the big book, but couldn't. Sam threw the pitch, and while it was in the air, Myra knew what was going to happen and realized what she should do. Laugh, clap, shrug it off. Myra pretended to be ready to catch the ball if anyone threw it to her, spread her legs apart, assumed the stance of an athlete, an identity she would never have. When Charlie hit the home run and laughter burst from the softball field, Myra stood and watched the ball. Charlie ran around the bases. The boys applauded, whistled, celebrated, slapped him a line of high fives. She quickly pulled out a strand of her hair and exhaled with the pain and what she assumed had been God's will, soaring over her head.
Wonderful, wonderful excerpt. So, Richard, let's hear from your poetry book or your prose poems. What's the name of the book? When was it published, or when will it be published?
It's called Unashamed Observations.
Oh, they're connected, sort of.
And it was published in March by Unsolicited Press.
Okay.
Okay. The first one is called An Amputee. An amputee sitting next to me on the train keeps a one-arm vigilance over his stump. Though I steal a glance at it, it is not long enough to allow it to sprout in my imagination either a hand or the missing fingers. I'm always intrigued by missing body parts, intrigued over their place of absence. Now he's covering up the stump with a magazine, a cheap magazine. I wonder who chopped off his hand and for what reason. Stealing? Merciless thought, but no mercy can put the hand back on, so why not? It is a godless loss, and no God can restore it. But why doesn't he have prosthetics done? But then what of my natural impressions? What would that artificiality do to them? Do you suppose he had me in mind when he didn't have the work done? Maybe my response that he's feeling now is a deterrent to such restorative thoughts, and maybe he keeps it unclad, exiting pinkly and swallowed. It looks as if the skin is swallowing itself just to stir my imagination. Droll thought, but that's not all. What if I just reached over and kissed it? Do you think the moisture of my lips would animate it, make it grow fingers that would reach into my mouth from my tongue and pull on it admiringly as a lifesaver? A no more repugnant idea could occur to me, and that is just why I think it. There, he's covered up his arm again. Earlier, he tried smoking, and now he stopped after I coughed in my throat, a forced cough. He put it out half lit. He must have some feelings. I imagine a relationship between us, perhaps a friendship over his handlessness. What an intimate basis for friendship to take hold, where my thoughts grasp what his body can't handle. Now he's pulled his sleeve down and is leaning over it with his free arm. He's playing the maiden, I can tell. But this time, I look the other way. Okay, the next one is called Her Hands. She was always having trouble with her hands. The cracked, dry palms, the creases at the fingers would separate down to the bloodline with deep fissures. I'd find her at the lamp with a needle and a magnifying glass, puncturing the tiniest blisters and pustules that were invisible to the naked eye. For hours she would be at her hands, poking the microscopic blisters that as often as not rose in response to her own needle. Physicians had no idea about the cracking. All known funguses were ruled out. It seemed to be just a case of spontaneous eruption of the skin in response to the companionless life she led, to her living by herself for so long. It was only natural that the hands swelled, grew red and sensitive, were poked with needles. You could see her under the lampshade, even when you visited, still giving pleasure to herself, hearing the exclamations of ooh and ah when the needle penetrated her skin. Yes, pleasure at the companionship of the needle, all steely and sharp, penetrating her skin, exposing her blisters that ran with a clear fluid that awarded her with the pleasure of having burst another pustule. She showed you this under the magnifying glass with a sense of triumph, like it was a reward almost. The ointments, the salves, the cotton and gauze that she wrapped her hands in before sleep, the emollients, all gave her a sense of accomplishment. But you could tell she took more pleasure from the long drafts of air she inhaled to convey to you that they hurt, were cracking again, fissuring. Even the thenar region had little scarifying nicks. The only portions that were saved were the palmistry lines, the life, the head, the heart lines. It was as if something in her body refused their obliteration, that the dryness, the redness, the crusting of the rest of the hand, especially the fingers where the itchiness was unbearable, she said, almost made it a cake of some unearthly dirt masquerading as something other than a hand. Didn't matter. The lifeline was for the most part intact. The head knew what it was doing, angling the needle into her skin. The heart, too, responding by bleeding at the appropriate times. How she could still be so absorbed in her hands when I was there, I didn't know, till I realized that she needed spectators to view how she overcame her loneliness, even in their presence. That even with so much cracking, scabbing, with such deep fissures, and with what must have been genuine pain, even despite the mystery as to the etiology, the actual cause of the fungus, she wanted to demonstrate, and even with the absence of a companion, to demonstrate that her life was still, despite their ravaged condition, still in her own hands. Okay, this is called A Little Boy's Balloon. A man is writing on the street with a pen. Without looking, he collides with a little boy's balloon. It bursts, and the boy looks wide-eyed, amazed. The man looks all around the crowd to find where the balloon was bought, but not finding that, he does the next best thing. He himself bursts into tears before the little boy, who now stares dry-eyed at the spectacle of a grown man crying in public over a burst balloon. Okay, this is called Your Heart is in the Right Place. At least your heart is in the right place, they said. Well, where could it be? For no matter how much they wanted to emphasize their own correctness, the heart is never misplaced, somewhere else than where it is. And does this not give rise to a deeper reflection that the position of the heart is always constant, static, that no matter what good or evil the heart does, it is always in the right place? This is called Dad Tickling Me. It started with Dad tickling me, she said. I had stayed back from school. I don't remember what for, but I was in my nightgown and Dad was partially dressed. We joked and were having such a good time, his holding me, tickling me, letting me go. I scampered free, let out explosions of laughter, and from him too bursts of air as I wriggled in and out of his grasp. Then all of a sudden Mom returned and yelled at us, scolded Dad and said, I never want you to do that again. And he was so embarrassed. Right in front of me, she scolded him, and his face got red, as if he had done something that would never have crossed his mind had Mom not come home and yelled at him like that. Okay, this one is called The Imperfections of Face. You pull her to you, past the imperfections of face, past the crookedness of the eyes, the weak lid, so frail that the lashes seem like tiny arrows, painful to look at, and the nose high and arched, but obtruding into everyone's business, even your own, and the tiny scars on the cheek, and the chin willful, thrusting, and the mouth all avarice when it smiles, all greedy, lustful sexuality, the smallness of it, the abbreviated line, the thin lips, so ungenerous, you wonder how they could be made for kissing. The whole face crooked, and there before you. How could she ever be drawn to the picture you have of yourself looking at her? Okay, this is called Same. We get up together, eat the same oatmeal, eggs, toast, drink the same coffee and orange juice, read the same morning paper, take the same walk, sit down at our desks at the same time, eat the same salad and soup for lunch, do the same dishes, and shop at the same supermarket, prepare the same supper together, chicken, rice, and broccoli, share the same ice cream for dessert over a sliced banana with a dash of brandy. We listen to the same radio programs after doing the same dishes and sharing the same opinions. At the same time, we brush our teeth and wash up at the same sink. And at 11 o'clock, we get into the same bed and caress each the same body and finally drift off to a different sleep. This is called Rock Candy. One day, 15 years later, you are standing before a class of Japanese students. The women all dressed to the T, some in the latest fashions, buttoned at the neck, arms crossed or folded on their desks, and you think of her, how you both had no money the day you drove her to Fisherman's Wharf for a job interview. And when she came back, she said, he asked me to take my top off. What? He said, to see if I would do it and could model some of their new lines. He said he owned 2 stores in San Francisco. And only your top? You asked. No, she said. And did you do it? She didn't answer. You're angry now. Did you? Yes, she answered curtly and embarrassed. Let's get some rock candy, you say to your class, forgetting for a moment where you are. I mean, Miss Watanabe, if you can't see the print, don't you have glasses? Oh, yes. She puts them on as a hard brilliance catches them with a crystalline light that your memory devours as something almost sweet. Okay, this is called Irving. I remember her saying to him, Irving, if you don't stop talking to yourself, the men in the white coats and butterfly nets are going to come and take you away to 11th and Maclay. Chances are Irving was really talking with himself, but it is also possible that he was muttering some disapproval under his breath. In fact, she was the one who named Irving the pack rat because he hoarded things. First, he carried them in his bulging pockets, then deposited them in secret stashes, which when she uncovered them, calling all 21 of us to the basement, she would display smack in the middle of the dressing room floor, our eyes all wide and her lip curling up to her nose in disapproval of old foodstuffs Irving had saved, or unlaundered socks she might find. The mentality was the opposite of finding a buried treasure, for Irving seemed to hide just what seemed most worthless. She, in one smooth motion, spilled it out from the shirts and socks he had them wrapped in, trifles we sometimes had discarded, but when we saw them strewn on the floor, the fruit of her uncovery, they would take on a value they hadn't had before, and we would be prompted to join her in accusing Irving of stealing what we had discarded. Perhaps Irving never knew the difference, for he, through this ritual of uncovering, when his soul was as if emptied of its contents there on the basement floor, would not utter a word of self-defense. His face would be that glowing pink that contrasted so well with the sparse wisps of blonde hair, a uniform pink that told of his overweight and the readiness of his blood to respond to any embarrassment. It was a sight there, all the hoarding spilled on the floor, and with Mrs. Shank yelling in Irving's face, pack rat, and the rest of us repeating the litany in chorus, pack rat, and Irving just standing there, stiffly under the bare basement light bulb in the center of the floor, his possessions at his feet, scattered all around the drain cover, his metal rimmed glasses, because of the straightness of his posture, catching the light, blinding us of any chance to look into his eyes for an idea of what he was thinking. Pack rat, we chanted. And I remember her yelling as she rooted through his things for him to empty his pockets right here and now, Mr. Provost, trying to erase even the dignity that his last name suggested. Okay, is that enough for... Oh, I can't hear you. I'm sorry.
To you, if you want to read one more, that's fine. If you think you're done, that's fine too. I think you're muted.
Okay.
Yeah.
She said she couldn't go until she finished the sweater for me. I didn't know how to make her leave, since the gift was the price I was paying for her staying, though I wanted her to leave. Her fingers lingered over each stitch as she sat looking at me with a smile on her face. You don't quite know what to do with the sweater knitted out of devotion to you, the thoughts that pass through the unreciprocated lover's mind as she imagines that her gift will ransom your feelings. Finally, she finishes. You try on the sweater. The color, you admit, does go with you, was well chosen, though the sweater doesn't fit. You both know that. But which by agreement you don't discuss. You don't tell her you feel uncomfortable in it, that you can't wait to get it off, that the arms are too short. You try not to reach to show it to her. All the girls are knitting sweaters for their boyfriends, she says. She shows you the magazine picture of the model you're supposed to look like. Still, the sweater is too tight. It hasn't taken into account the size of your chest. Maybe it is the heart she's left out. You feel constricted by it, by her feelings that she has stitched you up in, gotten you to wear. You make the appropriate comments, try not to hurt her feelings, but before you know it, are wriggling out of the too tight sweater. Her feelings will never fit you. You suspect she already knows that. The sweater, she must know, was only a symbolic effort. She's trying to give poignancy to what has failed between you, trying in this one last futile effort to bring you around. But you have had to wriggle out of her feelings before. Now they are left on the sofa, inside out. You embrace her with all the knowledge that soon she will go for good, with the sweater folded up and stored for next year in a plastic bag. You know you will never wear it, yet you thank her for the excess yarn she gives you in case it wears through someplace. Okay.
Thank you both for such wonderful, wonderful work. So, I have a couple of questions for Richard and a couple of questions for Anna, but we'll begin with Anna. So, Anna, is Mara in a rehabilitation center? Because people were patients, so I was just trying to get a sense of place.
Yeah, it's set in a rehab center. Yeah, it's set in a rehab center in the 1980s. So she and her patients are all there for anywhere from 30 to usually 60 days.
Okay, yeah, because I thought that was pretty interesting because it was patients, but it was sort of set like very routine in a very routine way.
Yeah.
How did you get the idea for it to set a novel in such a setting and in the time when and in the timing in the era?
Well, I mean, I know this is a shock to all of you, but I was in rehab when I was a teenager in the 1980s. And so a lot of the stuff in the book is drawn from my experiences there. Some of it's not. So, I mean, the idea to make, actually, the idea to turn that experience into a novel started in about, the idea started in about 2010, and then I started working on it in 2012. So yeah, so I mean, that's where the idea came from. But I also, I don't know, I was just writing this today, actually, in an interview answer with the Offing magazine. It was just, that space of, I'm obsessed with adolescence in a good way. I don't mean that to come out wrong. I'm obsessed with the kind of this like vulnerability that is just ever present in every adolescent, in the adolescent I was, in all the adolescents I knew when I was an adolescent, and I see it in adolescence, now. It's just I'm really interested in that space of growth and uncertainty and fear. And when I was an adolescent, I just spent all my energy, really so much of my energy, hiding that, trying to hide. Ultimately, vulnerability is such like a catchphrase anymore. I'm just tired of the word, but that's what it is, right? It's that emotionalness. And I spent so much energy just trying to hide that, and so that's a space that I like to write from in different ways and about in different ways.
Well, Mara seems pretty innocent because so I was wondering if that scene was an inciting scene for her to become pregnant.
Oh no, no. They use a condom, and
So
she's kind of, she's not an actively self-caring human being, and she doesn't know that she's not. It's just how she is. So she would have had sex without one. She was just going to do whatever he wanted. But
Oh.
one thing I enjoyed about writing that scene and writing Charlie is that he's a pretty good guy. He's a pretty good guy, you know. He wanted a condom. He's an interesting character. He respects her wishes. He's fun. He's not perfect, but I enjoyed writing about, you know, a good guy having sex with Myra instead of a bad guy. I really liked that. So.
And that comes through. That comes through.
Yeah.
And so, Richard, I was intrigued by a couple of your poems. I was wondering where the idea of the pack rat Irving came from, because hoarding is such a big deal in our society today, and it's part of OCD. But I sort of wondered, like, it seemed like a pretty cruel situation that this child was in, because he wasn't even hoarding anything. He just had sort of detritus in his pocket. So, can you talk about that poem and how you came to write that poem?
That came from real life. I was essentially, I grew up in an orphanage, and I lived with successive numbers of 20 boys at one time, 21 boys. And that was one instance of the actual house parent and the boy and the collaboration, getting together over his tendencies to hoard things. And we were all brought down to the basement to observe him as she humiliated him.
Yeah, that was a very painful scene. Actually, it had shades of the book where all the kids are on the island. I can't remember the name of it right now.
Lord of the Flies.
Lord of the Flies. It had shades of that because of the cruelty.
Yeah.
In it.
I have a question, Richard. I'm wondering how the experience that you talked about having growing up in orphanages or an orphanage, how that kind of manifests in some of your writing. I'm not talking about like necessarily like specific scenes from your life on the page. Maybe I am, but just how that experience shows up for you when you go to write.
Well, it doesn't necessarily dominate me. It's just one of the many things that I've experienced. So it doesn't. I guess to some extent I've outgrown it. Though I do have, it's very vivid in my mind. The experience. I lived with 21 different boys, so you have to adjust to each one. And it's influenced me, but it hasn't dominated my work.
Yeah.
I was thinking about that story, Irvin, and now that we know you were in an orphanage, the book All the Light You Cannot See, the two children are in an orphanage as well, the brother and the sister, along with other children. But the experience is so much different because the house mother was just such a loving person that she ended up being a real mother, kind of like someone that they grew up to care about and visited back again. If you have not read that book, it's All the Light We Cannot. Is it All the Light We Cannot See? It's really excellent. It was set during World War II.
Yeah, we did not necessarily get along with our house parents, so there was always a certain antagonism.
So were the house parents the same each time? I mean, did they change or rotate in and out?
That's the big thing. The house parents oftentimes, like I had one who he didn't even graduate high school. He didn't have really an understanding, except kind of a muscle, a use of his muscles against us, but didn't have a true understanding of children. So they
Oh,
were all different shades of people.
wow. Um, that's really extraordinary, especially as from the
Well,
point
you
of
would
view of a
expect,
writer trying to
because
mine that.
the school was actually sponsored. The school had controlling interest in the Hershey chocolate factory. So they had unlimited funds, millions of dollars. But that didn't, at the time when I was there, it didn't manifest itself in more educated house parents.
That's interesting right then and there as a topic.
Yes.
So I wanted to also talk about your very beautiful final poem that you read about with the metaphor of the sweater being for the relationship that wasn't working.
Yes.
Yeah, what a beautiful image of the sweater, a sweater made of devotion, but it didn't fit. So talk about that poem a little.
Um, I hate to say it, that is from actual bona fide experience.
Okay. Well, it seems like both of you are writing from bona fide experience, which gives your work an authenticity that it's hard to come by in other things. But that's a very beautiful metaphor. The stitches and the sweater that doesn't fit. I was, and the care that each character was taking with each other, not to say that it wasn't working. It was
Yes.
just evident in the sweater.
Yeah.
That's lovely.
Yeah. So let's talk about the writing life. How do you each approach, because how do you each approach the writing life? Do you write every day? Do you keep journals? Do you how do you approach the work? I guess we'll start with Anna.
That is tough for me right now. I haven't, I have a lot of students to teach this semester and every semester. So I haven't really written that much, since the novel came out. Before the novel came out, I wrote a lot. I worked on a second novel that still needs a whole lot of work. So, I'm working on that, but, so I feel kind of removed from my writing practice right now. I'm just kind of waiting for winter break so that I can feel it again. And I'm waiting for summer so I can feel it again. And then I'm wrestling with myself to, got to make time for this even when you're busy. Wrestling with
Yes.
that too. So I'm just wrestling right now. I don't know if I have anything to offer. I mean, when I am working on something, I try to work on it a whole lot every day when I'm working on something. Because that's kind of essential so that you know it. And I said this in some other another interview recently. It's essential so that you know it and so that you can see what's wrong with it, but also so you can see what's good about it. Like, I think one of the best pieces of writing advice I had was, oh wait, you have to work on it all the time, otherwise you won't see what's good about it. I was kind of early in writing and I had these beautiful things, beautiful, and then I just didn't work on them very much once they were written, because I was like, woo woo. And he said, no, that's not going to serve you. So, and I really appreciated that. So that's where I might be if I were writing right now.
And Richard, what about you? Do you write every day? What is your writing discipline?
Until recently, probably the last year, I have not written, but before that, I never missed a day.
Awesome.
So most of my life, I have written, and I got seven books published
Wow, that's amazing. Are they all books of poetry,
No,
or?
3 of them are collections of epigrams, and then one is the prose poem, and then 3 collections of stories.
Wonderful.
So you're pretty prolific.
Yes, I've done it a lot. Anna, I just wanted to say, I thought your description was really fine. Um, just right, never too much or too less.
Oh,
But I thought it was really very, very captivating.
thank you. Thank
Writing.
you.
I thought it was interesting. The boys, let's see, the boys were staring, even when no boys were staring. I thought that was a nice paradox there. And then you had nice comments on sport. I thought it was very good.
Thank you.
The work was just unabashed, and it seemed that nothing got in your way freely throughout, mentioning about condoms and all that. I thought that was just very fine and uninhibitedly good.
Richard, thank you so much.
Yeah.
I would have to agree. It's very hard to write a sex scene to do it without sounding pornographic, or just to do it with grace, and you did
Yes.
that very well.
With grace, that's nice. Yes.
Thanks. Thank you.
Very well.
It's funny. The first time I read from it formally, this will be real quick. I know we're out of time. The first time I read, the first chapter is full of it too. And the first time I read it, I was like, wow, this is uncomfortable. Oh my God, this is not fun at all. But now I'm really accustomed to it, and it's fine.
I think that's a very clear strength of your relative uninhibitedness about things.
Thank you.
So a lot of emerging writers or aspiring writers listen to the show. They may not listen to it actually while it's live, but they go back and listen to it along with other writers. So what advice do you have for aspiring writers, people who want to be where you are now, especially you, Richard, with 7 books under your belt? And you, I mean, Anna, with a novel, with all the minutia that goes into writing a novel. So what would you want young people, or maybe not young people, maybe people who are, retired and want to start writing their life into words, what do you have to say to people who have that dream?
Okay. I would say one thing, a secret is essentially read. So don't stop reading. And I found this in myself, that my style or whatever, I feel is not necessarily overwhelmed by anyone, but that you have all that background, that you've read Balzac, Dostoevsky. You just read the best of writing, and that will seep into you and work its own magic.
What wonderful advice. Wonderful advice.
Yeah.
Especially these days where people are mostly watching TikToks and YouTube without reading much. Anna, what is your what is your advice to aspiring writers?
I think I want to echo Richard's words. And also I want to say, I think there's quite a few people out there who read and who watch TikToks. In addition, I don't think there's, people do read, people buy books. There's lots and lots and lots of them who do. We might not see it that way, but yeah, I mean, I feel like reading the greats is absolutely, I mean, it's important, but I also feel like just reading like things outside your comfort zone. Read some science. Read stuff that read, what did I read? I mean, I swear, I think some of the best writing in the world is in joy of cooking. I have my mother's joy of cooking in my kitchen. And I remember years ago, I was looking at some of the recipes. I was like, wow, this writing is great. So you can just, that sounds kind of silly, but going outside your comfort zone and looking for good writing everywhere is also pretty important. It can be a great
I think
influence.
science is important. Yes.
Yeah, I think science is very important. I think that's a great tip, because science, there are novelists whose books are formed by science. I'm thinking of Andrea, and I can't remember her last name, but she was a researcher who left it to write, and all of her books are based in science. But you would never know it unless you like you think, wow, this writer did a lot of research. But all of her books are based in science and are really great. Andrea Barrett, that's her name. Well, we're out of time tonight. I want to thank you for joining us this evening. I'm always inspired every other week when I hear people read from their works. I'm always inspired to go back to the writing table myself and to see what I can do after I hear such wonderful, wonderful work. And that's one of the things I want to say about Unsolicited Press. Just about every person that I've had on this show, their work has been really wonderful, well thought out, beautifully written. So thank you for sharing your work with us tonight. And we hope that the people who listen will actually enjoy it as well. So I'm going to say goodnight to everyone. Thank you, anyone, for joining us. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to us on YouTube. And also, all the books are available on unsolicitedpress.com's website. And you can also go to Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and where all good books are sold. Thank you very much.
Thanks for
Bye,
asking.
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.